Praise the Lord. Our reflection for today is from the Gospel according to St. Luke, chapter 21, verses 5 to 19. Now, this passage is found in all the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's called the Olivet Discourse or the Olivet Prophecy. Here in Luke, Jesus spends his final week in and around the Temple of Jerusalem, speaking of the destruction of the temple and the end times. And it is so appropriate that as we draw to the end of our liturgical year, Jesus speaks of the end times. I will be focusing on three parts: the temple, the signs, and the catastrophes that are to come. Now, this scene is somewhere outside the temple. Jesus is with his disciples in the Kidron Valley, and he overhears some of the disciples admiring the grandeur and pomp of the temple. And then he says, "Not one stone will be left upon the other," and predicts its destruction. And the Israelites are stunned. How can such a sturdy structure be razed to the ground? Now, this temple was first built by King Solomon, but they were attacked by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, and the Israelites were taken into exile, and the temple was destroyed in 586 BC. Then, under the gracious reign of King Cyrus of Persia, he allowed the Israelites to come back home, and they rebuilt the temple. And the second temple was a testimony of faith and was modest in nature. Then, during the reign of King Herod, he remodeled the temple using precious stones, huge marble slabs, and it was a structure to behold, something like the Taj Mahal or the Basilica at St. Peter's. In all its pomp, it looked radiant, but the disciples failed to see the hypocrisy behind it all, the oppression, the rejection of the Messiah and his word. And we have an important takeaway regarding the temple. We too have beautiful structures, cathedrals, basilicas, churches. They are supposed to be true places of worship, but they lose their meaning when they just become tourist sites, or when we focus our gaze on the pomp, the rituals, and the revenue, and the policies, and the politics that go on. Our places of worship are meant to be where we fellowship and communicate with God and fellow being. Jesus points out that we, the living stones, are the mystical body of Christ, and we are called to build his body. And so it's not important if we don't have a structure. Where will we worship? Worship in spirit and in truth. Weren't we affected by COVID-19? And technology came to our rescue, and we continued worshiping God virtually together as a community, thanks to media. So God is telling us that we should be united. And as a mystical body, not even the gates of hell will prevail against it. Then secondly, he speaks about signs. The key verse is verse 7. The disciples ask, "And Master, when will these things come about? What will be the sign when it is the end?" And Jesus calmly tells them, quoting Matthew chapter 24, verse 36. "No one knows the day or the hour, nor the angels in heaven, nor the Son of Man, but only our Father in heaven. It is his secret." So it is not for us to speculate and to wonder about the end times. What is more important is for us to be prepared for those times to come, those challenging times. Continue doing the good works that we are meant to do. And many may argue, what is wrong in asking for signs? Even the prophets of old asked signs when they wanted to take important decisions. One such example was Gideon in the Old Testament. He asked God to use dew to confirm his will. And he placed a fleece on the threshing floor and asked God to make it wet if God was going to be with him in battle, because Gideon had to lead the Israelites against the Midianites. And true enough, next morning, the fleece was wet, and Gideon squeezed a bowl full of water. Then Gideon dared to ask God for a reverse sign. He said, "Now, God, make the threshing floor wet and keep the fleece dry." And so it was. So we too need signs or confirmation when getting into some important decision, maybe a decision for a life partner, a business venture, or to join ministry. But what is more important, that we keep three things in mind. The motive should be genuine, the mission, and the manner in which we ask God. We don't make deals with God. We have to accept His will. We don't need God to put His stamp of approval on our self-made plans. Finally, let thy will be done, O Lord. And the last part, Jesus warns us to be watchful, alert. He says, many will come in my name as false prophets, leading you astray. What is important is to be equipped. Read my word to know right from wrong, so that you will not be led astray. Then he speaks of natural calamities and man-made calamities, earthquakes, pestilence, famine, tsunamis. And has our century not seen it all? But still, it is not going to be the end. He says, nation will wage war against one another. True, there are divisions, there is dissension, but we've got to stand firm. Also, he warns us, by following him, we are going to face persecution, betrayal by friends, by our very own family. But he says that he will give us words of wisdom as to testify for him and in his name's sake to stand for the truth. And so we need not fear. So the takeaways from today's passage: first, the bedrock of faith does not lie in temples. However remarkable, beautiful, admirable structures or things may seem to us, someday it's going to come to an end. It's all transient. What is important is that we worship God, we touch the living face of God, we build a community of God. Secondly, the bedrock of faith does not lie in science. Many of us look in the wrong places. We look to the skies, we look at astrology, we look at palms, we look at horoscopes. What is more important is, do not follow the gurus who will lead you astray. For we have God who is the way, Jesus, the way, the truth, and the life. And lastly, the bedrock of faith is Jesus Christ alone. He is the rock on which we stand. He is our firm foundation. And we should focus all our energy and resources into following His ways, following His commands, obeying His will and purpose in our lives, and not being bothered about other things. And this